think for the general public, the role that science can play is just really reminding them to be curious and that we don't have the answers to everything.
Great science communication makes complex ideas come to life. At its best, it connects with people, influences key decision makers, and delivers vital information.
Highlighting researchers and getting them to write their own stories. I just think that is where science communication is working. I also love documentaries, and stories about science are they're just so powerful.
In this episode, we're highlighting real-world successes in science communication, exploring how humanizing scientists helps the public connect, and examining the messages and mediums shaping the future.
I'm your new co-host, Kai Nussbaumer.
And I'm Micah Schweizer. This is Season 2 of Balancing the Future from METTLER Toledo.
On this show, we delve into the world of science and technology and explore its transformative impact on our lives.
Before we jump into the conversation today, Kai, I'd love for our listeners to learn a little bit more about you.
Yeah, for sure. So I've worked at METTLER Toledo for almost 7 years in lab marketing. So this means that I get to communicate with scientists and researchers and really let them know what the company is all about.
And I understand you also have a media background.
Yeah, I worked in local TV news and I covered political news as well as the weather. After listening to Season 1, I can really say it's great to be a part of this podcast.
And really excited to have you on the show.
I hadn't really thought of science being that creative before that moment. And I know you can be creative in sort of the way you design experiments and everything. But for me, it almost became like science and art combined.
That's science communications expert Rachael Vorwerk. She's talking about a moment from her college days when she created Where Do Hippos Camp? A picture book for 5-year-olds that taught them about a part of their brain called the hippocampus. This book had a profound effect on her career path.
Didn't even know science communication existed before that, and then left that subject and thought, yeah, okay, I know exactly what I want to be now.
And maybe it's important at this point to say that communication, I mean, when I hear communication, I just sort of somehow automatically think words, but we're not limited to words in science communication, is what I'm hearing.
No, yeah, we're definitely not. I think it can be anything. It can be any channel or any way of describing science. It can be a podcast. It can be a documentary. It can be, I don't know, like a public lecture. It's all science communication. Anything, I guess, that makes science more accessible.
And who's it for?
It depends. Sometimes it can be for grant funders if you're a researcher. It can be for the general public if you're just trying to raise awareness about your science. It can be for other academics. Say if you're a researcher and you kind of want to work on more interdisciplinary collaborations, then, you're going to need to sort of adapt your language so other disciplines understand. It can be for policymakers. Yeah, it's sort of endless.
Now, why can't the facts just speak for themselves?
I think because they don't have emotions in them. I've done a bit of psychology research myself as well, and it's just not interesting enough to have facts. We're humans and we like stories and we like emotions. We relate well to them. So it's just so important to not just relay facts to everyone. I mean, we've all been on the other end of that in a conversation where someone might be rattling off facts to us and statistics, and it's so hard to remember information like that when it's just presented to you. And some people are better at that than others. But if you've got a story that you're listening to with sort of facts woven in, where you're kind of pairing education with entertainment, then it's just so powerful.
I had in my own career once an opportunity to talk to a group of researchers about communication, and we got on the topic of emotional resonance and that humans are wired for story and this whole idea. And somebody asked me a question afterwards that I'll never forget. It was, aren't we manipulating our audience if we make them feel something? That's very much the kind of question I think might come from somebody who really is zeroed in on the facts, like the numbers, the data, that's what matters. What would you say if a scientist you're coaching asked a question like that?
It feels like a cynical way to come at it from, and maybe the place it's coming from is a little bit like a bit of a fear of maybe presenting information inaccurately. But I've worked with researchers for a long time, and they do really like to obviously have their work presented accurately. I want that too. But it's sort of this idea of really needing to meet in the middle, because if you do just present very statistics-heavy information without sort of the engaging overtone being considered, it's not going to land. I also would argue that a lot of science communication is about empathy. For me in particular, putting myself in my audience's shoes to kind of think, oh, well, what does the person on the street care about science? Or, what does the grant funder, what do they care about science? So could we say that I'm manipulating my audience by empathizing with them? Maybe. But I think, look, the big vision here is for science to become more accessible. So if we're going to make that happen, then we need to be thinking about our audience and what they care about.
Do you think the public has a role to play as an audience, that there's some level of understanding that's incumbent on us? If you look at sort of the average Western educational system, we all have a certain degree of science education in our backgrounds. Can we rely on that? Or do you need to just sort of assume that you're working with a population that is, busy with other thoughts and ideas and priorities in their life?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think I normally err on the side of assuming less knowledge in science than more. The worst thing I think we can do as science communicators is to exclude any audiences or make everyone feel silly for not understanding. Then you're sort of building this feeling that science is a privileged thing to be able to access. I think for the general public, the role that science can play is just really reminding them to be curious and that we don't have the answers to everything. And it's kind of a weird feeling to sit with sometimes, that you don't have a predefined answer or outcome. And failure is actually an inherently good thing in science, because it makes you go to the next level of understanding something more.
There's so many cases where science or scientific information or findings can sort of cause cognitive dissonance or some kind of friction, whether it be political or emotional or perhaps even moral for an audience. How do you navigate that?
It's so complicated because, this idea of cognitive dissonance, of where you might be a very logical and critical thinker, and we all do it. I'm speaking on behalf of all humans here.
Yeah, exactly. It's not a scientist versus non-scientist trait.
Yeah, so, we know that facts exist, but still our values sometimes come over the top and they sort of wipe all the facts out of our brains. But even this, I've heard once that, your neighbor or family member is likely to have more influence on you than like a qualified scientist. And I feel like that shows cognitive dissonance a lot, where again, it's like, facts don't win people over, emotion does, and trust. So the big question there was, how do you navigate that? I think, again, it comes back to empathy, of really meeting your audience where they are, understanding what their values might be, or trying to see what habits they might already have and trying to meet them there.
Earlier, Rachael highlighted just how critical it is to tailor science communication to different audiences. But it's not just about the message. Who delivers it is also crucial.
Think back to the COVID-19 pandemic, a time when public health campaigns had to act fast and reach people from all walks of life. In the U.S., public health organizations teamed up with faith leaders, equipping them with the facts to boost vaccination rates in their communities.
Meanwhile, in the UK, health officials partnered with soccer clubs, magazines, and authors to create eye-catching visuals pushing for vaccine uptake. Again, it wasn't just about the message. It was also about who delivered it.
And while Rachael wasn't on the front lines of pandemic communications, she believes the lessons from that time matter just as much today.
I think what works best is when you just have a lot of voices. COVID in particular was a real moment where if you're a researcher and you did have a voice, say you were studying infectious diseases or that's your background, it was so important for those people to stand up and get on Twitter at the time and even get on our daily news updates. In Australia, we had our chief scientist standing with our prime minister sometimes, but also with our sort of state level government representatives as well. to have science and critical facts, I guess, or just facts, very clear and very easy to access.
You mentioned building trust earlier. I think COVID was so interesting because we got to see the scientific process in real time and a compressed amount of real time in a way that directly affected our day-to-day lives, which is not typical. We don't experience science quite at our fingertips like that. And the question I have around trust is this. At the beginning, I recall washing my hands so often, that they were sort of getting chapped and dry and red.
Yeah.
And then one day came the news that actually hand washing was not the way to prevent, it's still important, but it was not the tool for preventing the spread of COVID. It was masks. And so in some sense, the science was wrong.
Yeah.
This is challenging, I think. That's the nature of science. Science is not right from the get-go. It's an iterative process, getting closer and closer to understanding a system or a situation.
I really think that was so tough for the communicators at the time, because it might seem like the researchers were trying to trick us earlier on, or that they were really barking up the wrong tree of wash your hands. Oh, but now wear masks. The other really interesting thing about COVID, and particularly in terms of science communication about it, was that we had a direct statistic that we could look at every single day as to how we were all performing as a group. The daily stat of there are X amount of cases of COVID in this state at the moment. There are X amount of people in hospital ICU right now. What a stark way to represent data that we can all relate to, that then kind of links directly to the research into finding a vaccine. The thing in science communication to get people to care about it is to link it back to things that the audience cares about. What did we care about during COVID? Well, we didn't want to get COVID ourselves, and we didn't want our family and friends to, end up in ICU or to get it either. So it's just meeting the audience again where they are, and the sort of common denominator of what they care about is the way that you can do effective science communication, in my opinion.
Let's talk a bit about the areas where you've been active as a science communicator. I understand that during COVID, you were working on a high-speed internet chip project, and maybe this could serve as an example of a place where your science communication made a real-world difference.
Yeah. It was a really interesting story that I worked on with our researchers at Monash, Swinburne and RMIT unis all in Melbourne, Australia, where the lead author, Bill Corcoran, found that he could basically open up lots of different, we'll call them highways on a chip. Our internet normally travels through sort of one wavelength of light in our optical fibres. Basically, the researchers found that they could create this chip that was able to open up lots of different colours of light and send data down simultaneously, down lots of different colours of light at once. And why do we care about that? Well, it really helps to increase our internet data speeds. So it was just at the start of COVID, and the article was coming out in Nature Communications, and we all thought, oh my goodness, how are we going to cut through the noise of COVID right now? Yes, rightfully, it is taking center stage in the media. But then Bill, one of our researchers, was so clever, and he put this quote together, and he said, now more than ever, we are relying on the internet. We're trying to contact our loved ones via Zoom, and Zoom has just, the amount of data that we're using has gone through the roof, where everyone is taking meetings online now. How's that for an example of relating data and us caring about the internet to the problem at hand? My role in that was to kind of bring together lots of university media teams at 3 different unis. And I coordinated, all of us worked together, but we had the media team from Swinburne, Monash and RMIT and me all working together to write 3 separate media releases from our different unis, which is a very weird thing to do. Normally you just have one media release that goes out. But basically each media release profiled the researcher from their specific uni. And, it doesn't seem like the greatest success from the outside, but the biggest moment was when we got an article in BBC World News where, it said, Australian researchers from 3 unis have broken the record for the world's fastest internet at 44 terabits per second, which is equivalent to 1,000 high-definition movies in a split second via a chip the size of your fingernail. And so the research is incredibly impressive on its own, but I'm very proud of the way we coordinated the media release. So, BBC World News celebrated 3 of the key researchers and not just one. That's kind of unheard of to have multiple unis represented. So that's a big win for us. We're profiling lots of researchers at once, but also incredible research.
And tying it to the present moment.
Yes, exactly.
that's consumed everything, that's sucked all the oxygen out of the room in the media space.
Exactly. Yeah, it was credit to Bill for coming up with that quote, because he just paved a way in the noise for us to exist in that landscape as well.
One of Rachael's key audiences is grant funders. A few years ago, she worked with a team to land a 72 million Australian dollar investment.
Their innovation is to shrink an ultra-precise measurement tool that's currently 2 meters tall by 1 meter wide down to a size small enough to fit inside a watch, sort of like how room-sized computers have shrunk down to smartphones, this time with a device that can measure pretty much anything.
We could help astronomers find Earth-like planets. We could make biomedical diagnostic devices much more accurate. So we could even breathe into a device and it would measure the gases in our breath to see what symptoms we'd have before they even arise for diseases. Just crazy stuff.
Instead of relying solely on traditional grant application processes, Rachael helped lead a creative communications campaign. It focused on real-world impact, built momentum, and most importantly, told a compelling story about what this device could do.
In the end, they secured the funding. We can't say for certain the comms campaign sealed the deal, but it's a clear example of the kind of creativity science communication demands, just like Rachael talked about at the start of the episode.
So what about today? In 2025, what aspects of science communication should we be focusing on?
Well, I just feel like everyone is talking about AI at the moment and language generation models. I think that is where we need a lot of help to use this new technology and figure out its limitations still, and to figure out what role it currently plays and what it might play in the future. As far as I'm concerned, the best way to navigate that right now is to just literally experiment with these tools. But yeah, I would be more than happy to hear more about sort of the limitations. And, the media outlet, The Conversation, is so good at explainer pieces like this. I'm not getting commission from this by saying it, but I just really love their work because they get researchers to write articles themselves and they work with editors there. It's a great way to build critical thinking skills in the general public. These articles are written in a really accessible way and they relate to our everyday lives.
Do you see anywhere where science communication is really working right now?
Yeah, I think, again, highlighting researchers and getting them to write their own stories. I just think that is where science communication is working. I also love documentaries, and stories about science they're just so powerful. Particularly, the best science communication is when you don't even know that you're learning about science. It's sort of sneakily hidden in, and not even sneakily, that sounds manipulative, but, when science is in something and you don't even know you're learning about it because it's just engaging enough on its own, that's the best science communication.
Yeah, because curiosity has been sparked in the end.
Exactly. Curiosity, you're curious, you're inspired, and yeah, exactly. It's just sparked something in you that it just must be a really great story. Comes back to storytelling.
How do you avoid the risks around dangerous oversimplification or sensationalizing research or findings?
I'd say it's one of our biggest challenges in communicating science. Because I work in sort of a research centre and I have access to researchers very easily when I'm communicating their work and maybe writing a media release or an impact piece about their work, what often happens is that I interview the researchers, I analyse that and I write it into a piece and I try to make it really engaging, right? But then I go back to the researcher and show it to them. And there is such a sort of moment of compromise there where the researchers say, no, this is really too far. And so it's a real push and pull moment there, because then I say, well, yeah, great, I agree, I'm on your team, I want it to be accurate, but it's still got to be engaging. So those 3 paragraphs you just wrote in as a heading aren't going to work either. So we meet in the middle. I'm lucky that I can work with researchers directly and they can sort of pre-approve things before they go live. For journalists, I think it's really important for them to, just, I guess, take really good notes when they're speaking to researchers. It also comes back to the communicators, the science communicators in centres or universities, in writing a really good, accurate, robust media release in the first place. So journalists have a great sort of foundation to work from in terms of accurate content.
So another audience that you're tailoring something for.
Yes, exactly. And the media releases, they need to be written with the scientists and the researchers so they're accurate from the beginning.
Mm-hmm. Because I imagine if there's room for misinterpretation, then you're opening up a lot of risk.
Exactly, yeah. And credit to the researchers that I work with, they're always sort of thinking a few steps ahead, thinking, oh, no, don't say it in that way, that could be misconstrued. Or because when you are the one writing it, sometimes you lose perspective. It's always good to have someone sort of looking over your work as well to make sure that it won't be misconstrued.
Do you think that scientists, researchers have a responsibility to communicate their research to the public, to have it be broadly understood?
Yes, I do. I completely think that, because a lot of our research funding is from taxpayers' money. So I think there is an absolute responsibility for researchers to be talking about what the taxpayers' money is going towards. Yes, there are these challenges of researchers not having enough time to communicate their work. I guess it shows the value of investing in a science communicator. The more we can bridge this divide of the us versus them, of the sort of the stereotype of the kind of like elite scientist or researcher who doesn't talk to the general public very often. It's not good. It doesn't lend itself well to science being accessible. It kind of creates this divided us and them thing between researchers and the public.
Especially given that not all, but certainly a significant portion of scientific research is about tangible societal needs or challenges or improvements.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I agree.
In some areas, there's a public lack of trust in scientists.
Climate change is a good example. Scientists overwhelmingly agree that climate change is real, driven by human activity, and getting worse. But in the U.S., only about 1/3 of the public believes scientists fully understand its impacts.
And this gap in trust also shows up in debates over genetically modified crops, vaccines, and a range of other issues. Why? It's not just about facts. People often filter information through personal values, political identity, and cultural beliefs.
This is a tough divide to cross, but Rachael is excited about the new avenues of communication that might open up in the next few years.
I think that virtual reality is going to play a massive part in science communication in the future. I'm so excited to have VR being more accessible to me as well. I just think in terms of educating people about science, the more we can make the invisible or the hard to see things accessible, which VR is awesome at. You can basically, design something and get in the veins of your own body and, you'll see all the crazy stuff happening in your blood in a virtual reality headset. I'm also super excited about, and this is sort of my prediction that I've had for a long time, but do you know that Black Mirror episode called Bandersnatch? It's a very specific reference. It was on Netflix a few years ago, and it was a choose your own adventure, basically TV episode. All you needed was your remote to kind of choose A or B. Do you want the protagonist in the story to go and speak to ex-colleague on the right or leave work early? A or B, which one do you choose? The story would change depending on, which option you chose. I would love to see science communicated like that, because then it kind of shows this idea of, yeah, science isn't predetermined. You don't know where you're going to end up. And I think that sort of choose your own adventure style can get a non-technical audience in that mindset of, well, we don't know where this is going to go. That's kind of like, that's science, right? I'm really excited about sort of those interactive formats becoming more and more accessible.
What advice would you give to scientists who want to become better at communicating the work they're doing?
I do a lot of training with scientists, and the piece of advice that I give them, just the place to start, is to just put yourself in your audience's shoes. What does your audience care about? You know, and then experiment and practice. Say you're at a barbecue on a Sunday with your family and friends. Mm-hmm. Just chat to them about your research and see when their eyes start to glaze over. That's okay if they do. Maybe they won't. But take note of when people start to lose interest. And then you try a new way of communicating your research. And over time, you get better and better and better at figuring out what your audience cares about. And you'll probably end up finding that real world application where it's sort of the common denominator between your research and what they care about.
Scientists tend to talk to each other in a particular language, one might say, because they all speak it and they all understand it and they can convey real and deep information with it. But scientists are also, people who watch shows on Netflix and, go to barbecues yes. and so forth. Is there a place for a different type of communication between scientists?
I'm really excited about this exact thing where it's sort of like, how do we humanize researchers more? I'm sort of running this mini experiment myself in my research centre, trying to basically make the same kind of documentary as 7Up. Have you heard of 7Up?
Tell me about it.
Yeah, so it's basically like this UK TV series. The producers followed a bunch of people in the UK and interviewed them from when they were like 7 years old, and then came back in when they were 14 years old, came back when they were 21, and they kept interviewing them in this kind of like lifelong social experiment to see how their lives played out. It's just a coincidence that the research centre I'm at is 7 years, but every year I'm interviewing a subset of the researchers and saying, hey, what's life going to be like in the year 2050? Tell me how it's going to change based on your research and what you've found. I'm trying to document that idea of science being iterative and a researcher thinking they'll end up at an end goal or having an end goal in mind, but showing that science is not chronological. They might go ping-ponging around and not even get to the final goal. I'm trying to humanize the researchers. I'm trying to kind of document their failures as well to show that failures are a part of science. They're actually kind of useful so you don't keep going down the wrong path. But yeah, I guess, again, it's a form of storytelling. And I'm also trying to ask the researchers, what do you do in your spare time? What do you do when you've worked on an experiment for like a year and it fails? How does that feel? And what do you do? What do you do to sort of relax? And what's your favorite TV show of 2024? That was one of my interview questions this year.
And I suppose through all of this, remember that behind every data point, there's a person.
Yep, exactly. Yeah. And I think what's really important is also the career paths are just so diverse. And I think showcasing that to the next generation of prospective scientists is so important as well, to show that it's not sort of a one-track pathway that you go on. It can be sort of a number of ways to get into science.
Now, you had a very clear moment in your education where sort of the light bulb went off and you were like, science communication, that's it for me. What type of person should be thinking about stepping into science communication as a career?
Yeah, I think someone that is very curious and maybe inspired. I guess I'd say I'm a naturally curious person, someone who, you got to be pretty patient, someone who likes telling stories and is excited to train and empower others, someone that feels okay to step aside and help to lift up someone else. because you're not necessarily going to be in the spotlight yourself. So yeah, I'd say all those skills, I think, and traits.
We've been speaking to science communication expert Rachael Vorwerk. So Micah, what are some of your key takeaways from this conversation?
Obviously, it seems like we can't fully understand the implications of science for our lives and the implications for our societies if we don't have science communicated in a way that we as non-scientists can understand. And so I was very much taken by Rachael's efforts to humanize science, to remind us that it's actually people who are behind scientific research and sharing their stories as a way of building connection and trust and making science more relatable.
Yeah, I mean, anytime you're communicating in a public space, it's really important to avoid alienating or talking down to your audience. Really making people feel unintelligent can make them shut down even quicker, and it can distract from creating meaningful dialogue.
Yeah, I think so much of it really is about building trust and building relationship and engagement. I think she talked a lot about how important it is to take science beyond the facts and figures and into the emotional realm through storytelling. And I think the trust element is challenging too, because of course science by its very nature is not static, right? So how do you build trust in a topic that is supposed to change, is supposed to evolve, is supposed to bring forward new information? And I think what Rachael had to say about science communication's role in all of this just goes to show how critical it is that how we talk about science is as important as the science itself.
Yeah, that's definitely true. Even during COVID-19 pandemic, it was clear that public relations were shaped by the perceived credibility of the messengers. And communicating about fast-moving and complex topics such as artificial intelligence or pandemics, it's really challenging and requires a certain adaptability and certainly a lot of clarity. This has been Balancing the Future from METTLER Toledo.
What questions about science and technology would you like answered in a future episode?
Let us know by leaving a review, or if you listen on Spotify, leave us a message in the comments section.
And be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.